Uhuru. Thank you for joining us. Uhuru, my name is Coco Lewis, and Uhuru means freedom. I'm the International Executive Committee Economic and Development Coordinator for the National African Women's National Organization, AMWO, and I'm also your MC for tonight's political education. African Women Must Lead with Yejide Oramila is a series of live monthly political education programs from the African National Women's Organization led by President Yejide Oramila. Tonight's topic is the war on drugs, which will go into the history of the war on drugs in the U.S. and the ongoing colonial impacts of African people. There will also be opportunities to raise issues about this PE during our Q&A period, but please comment and engage throughout the program. African Women Must Lead is being multi-streamed live on the Burning Spirit and AMWOL channels on YouTube, AMWOL's Facebook page, and hopefully on our Instagram. Please take time to like, share, and follow us on these platforms, and was also on Instagram and Twitter for those folks who want to keep up with what we're doing between broadcasts. If you'd like to know the exact dates of future streams, make sure you follow us and check out our website for details. Uhuru, welcome, President Yejide.
Well, Comrade, thank you so much for the introduction. And we back. We back in April, and tomorrow's 420, and we wanted to do a show that talks about drugs and the impact that it has on African people. And we were just talking right before the show about some of the ways that the war on drugs deeply impacted people in our community, specifically family members, and so on and so forth. So it's more than just this political thing that happens because there's a conspiracy against African people in this country, but this is a very personal and impactful thing that has happened to people's families on both sides of people who have been impacted, caught AIDS because of it, have died because of it, got hooked on drugs because of it, lost their relationships.
Lost their kids.
Okay. I just got word that my mic is staticky. I don't know what to do about that, but hopefully it'll get better throughout the program. And then on the other side too, that we have people who actually sell drugs, and have gone to prison because of it, and has been deeply impacted their lives too by the drug economy in our communities, in different communities. And I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, Irvington, New Jersey. So I was talking to Coco and Jay about, what that looked like. And, that was really zombie town. Like people look at these, what's that show on A&E?
The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead. That was truly The Walking Dead. So like our communities are really devastated by it. So thank you so much, Coco, for the introduction. Yeah, so this is a political education that was inspired by Chairman. Chairman talks about, first of all, the African People's Socialist Party has a policy of no drugs, period. Like not even the ones that are currently legal in the United States. And even though there's a whole host of reasons why people might take substances, including marijuana and some other kinds of things that we were just talking about beforehand. The African People's Socialist Party believes that, we have to be clear of mind, and we don't want any mistakes or things that are happening because of artificial substance to impact us as African revolutionaries and how we're seen by the people. So, that's still the stance, despite the fact that it might not be on trend with what people are doing now. But we're going to talk about what that looks like right now, and how so-called illegal substances in the United States, including marijuana, has changed and has been shaped by a movement of people who have been talking about making it legal for quite some time for a number of reasons. One of them being, in terms of marijuana, it being a medicinal herb that people have used for thousands of years to remedy and many different ailments, and been used for just recreational purposes, but also for meditation, etc. There's a whole reason, a whole list of things that people use cannabis for, and but. But more than that, this discussion is really just about the political implications of substances, illegal substances. The United States dubbed illegal drugs in this country, and the impact that has had on African people. And again, it was inspired by Chairman's talk. He did a talk at one point around like the, why Africa, especially when a lot of this legalization of marijuana became on trend a few years ago, and a lot of states were starting to decriminalize it. That, he made a statement. And one of the things that he opened up with was really looking at, some of the history of drug use and the history of imperialism using and controlling the generation and sale of drugs internationally. A lot of people know that the war in Afghanistan, believe that the war in Afghanistan was really also about the growing of poppy and being able to use that as a plantation, really, to generate crack poppy, to get poppy seeds so that they can generate crack cocaine and start to use that as a way to fund their war, because you have to fund it some kind of way. But before that, I was really intrigued by this historical basis for the opium wars, right? And I'm mentioning this too as a precursor to what I'm going to be talking about in terms of the United States, is because we want to really get a full understanding about the way that the imperialists have used drugs, or the control of and sell of drugs, to for their own benefit, and to also try to decimate their enemy. So, I was reading up on it, where the United States the Britain, to be specifically, and America, were engaged in the opium wars with China between 1800 and 1858, where they were trying to say that they wanted to have free trade, like they wanted to encourage China to be engaged in free trade. And the free trade that they wanted to do was to force China to accept the trade, the importation of opium, which China had banned, because even the small amounts that they had let in, through so-called amicable trade between Britain and China, was starting to devastate the people of China. So before that, China had produced items for export that Britain wanted, especially tea, and there was nothing that Britain was importing into China that Chinese people wanted. There was no market for anything that they actually had to give. Everything that China was producing was being utilized, and China was raking over resources hand over foot, because everybody wanted a Chinese product, whether it was the tea or some other kind of good that they were producing. And Britain was just like, well, we got to make something out of this deal, because they have this trade agreement that they're not benefiting from. So what they started to do was they recognized that opium was being used in China for medicinal purposes, and so they started to they had India as a colony, and so they started to use part of India as a way to produce the poppies, the opium, and they started to import that into China. And so when people started to transfer it from being medicinal to into a recreational drug, and if people were dying from overdose, they were overdosing off of opium. The community, like, people were fighting and doing whatever they could to get their hands on the opium that was being flooded into the economy through the importation of this drug from Britain. China was just like, nah, this is crazy. We don't want this no more. We're going to close down the borders. Opium is outlawed here. We're putting in policies to prevent opium from being sold in our streets, and we're making it illegal for you to use opium. As a matter of fact, one of the penalties for being a user of opium was like 100 lashes or something, with like a bamboo cane or something like that. And then that hopefully will help you get rid of your addiction, which we probably know it did not. but they were trying stringently to rid themselves of the opium scourge. However, Britain was like, we are going to, we need you to, this is illegal. We're going to try to force you to take this opium. We're going to enforce this free trade agreement onto you. And the free trade agreement would mean that you would have to open up your ports or whatever for opium. China was like, nah. So Britain Britain was just like, we're gonna smuggle it. They had made it illegal to import opium. So Britain was just like, we're gonna, there's a lot of people in China who want to make some money. So they started to have underhanded deals with the Britain. And so they started smuggling the drug in. So I think one of the amounts that I saw was that between what was a normal amount of importation of opium was like 4,500 uh, crates, but that increased to like 20,000 crates when the importation of opium became a big thing. So they had two opium wars in China. The first one ended in China not being successful, and they ended up handing over, Hong Kong as a colony of Britain that basically Britain used for whatever it wanted to use it for, and then and basically forced China to because of the military might of Britain, and China was not that strong at that time in terms of militarily, the military might of the great empire of Britain, and then the United States combined forced China into a contract to allow the importation of opium, which then increased it twofold over what had already been smuggled in. And then the emperor at the time was just like, nah, we're not going to do this no more. So they tried to push back against this agreement. And then they were engaged in another opium war where they also lost again, but this time they didn't have to subscribe to all of the things, but it really opened up the territory of Hong Kong to Britain. So I think one of the things they said about how people understand the opium wars in China is it's like China was weak and we will never be weak again. Basically, they're just like, China was weak and we will never be weak again. We would never ever be subject to the might of anybody else's army or kingdom. And we're not going to allow some outsider to determine for us what it is that we're going to take in and what we're not going to take in, because that obviously devastated the entire population. And I wanted to open up with that because, as we can see, like, even though people might see this as in history as like some drug thing, it's really like a political assassination of a country. It's also a destruction of an entire population of people, and really to undermine them. And China learned from that. So even today, when we think about China and how China deals with the United States and other places in the world, like, y'all, this is like part of the background, the history of the things that they've had to endure dealing with the United States, and things that I'm sure that they don't soon forget in terms of dealing with imperialism. So I'm saying that to say, as we navigate over to the United States, that the United States has history and participating in the using drugs as a way to decimate their enemies, right? Using drugs as a way to undermine an economy, and to undermine the forward progression of a people, and to really get their way, and yeah, just to get their own way. And in the United States, we saw I saw, some of y'all might not have been alive, but I saw, during the war in Nicaragua, when the Sandinistas were fighting for their national liberation, and the United States was just like, nah, we can't have that sort of thing. We saw the creation of the Contras by the United States government as a way to overturn the gains of the Sandinistas who were fighting for their national liberation in Nicaragua. So one of the things is that they needed to fund this war that they were having with the Sandinistas, and in order to do that, they were growing cocaine. They were taking advantage of what was already innately happening in Nicaragua, but also they're now using that as a way to produce resources to pay for their ongoing war with the Sandinistas that wasn't very public, but was still something that was on the books in the United States for the United States to do. And there've been plenty of movies made around this issue. There's a TV show called Snowfall. There's a book that's out there that talks about the CIA's involvement in flooding the United States, and particularly Black communities, with the crack cocaine and using the resources made from the sale of this very highly addictive drug to fund a war against people who were fighting for their own national liberation. And in turn, what happens is that it solved another problem for the imperialists, right? In the United States, where we were, this is like late 70s, early 80s, where people were, in the 70s, people had been pro-Black African power, talking about, there was a Black Panther Party, there was Black power, Black liberation that was being talked about in the streets. People were struggling for their own national liberation in this country and in Nicaragua. And, they basically militarily defeated the Black Revolution of the 1960s. And part of the way that they did that too, outside of also blazing guns, is by flooding our communities with drugs. And so you have people who have been militarily defeated. They don't no longer have these heroes that they were looking up to. They always seen as death and destruction, people being murdered in the street for fighting for their freedom. And then on top of that, you're dealing with economic decline, and people's don't have what they need to, and now this drug comes in, and it caused a lot more destruction, don't get it wrong, but it also allowed for people to make quick money, and for people who hadn't had an opportunity to get what they need, to finally get what they need. But in turn, this drug was sold to our community. So what I was talking about earlier was, family members who got hooked on this drug, and family members who sold the drug, people, friends who was maybe like petty, crooks or whatever, stealing cars and maybe, doing little runs or whatever, then got mixed up in this drug stuff that allowed them to make more money, and in turn turned our community into zombies. And more than that, it turned our communities into zombies, but it also created more violence in our community. So people were killing each other over this drug. They were territorial. People had to, like, it was a hot commodity. People were addicted to it, highly addicted to it. But then because the demand was so great, there's a lot of fighting over territories of who's going to sell what. And so there's a lot of like murders that were happening because of this. And, me as somebody growing up in the 1980s and 1990s and stuff like that, you saw the transition from, just a community to people, to a place that you couldn't even walk, down the street for anymore. So here we have, the community being deeply impacted, and the creation of this war on drugs that started with the Reagan era. And that's why the Iran Contra affair was so hilarious. And I say hilarious not in a funny way, but ironic way, in that here's Reagan talking about, we got to crack down on the war on drugs, and when African people are dying in the streets because of this epidemic, and we've been called super predators, and we've been called crack welfare queens, and we produce crack babies, and we were made to we were seen as savages. We were the community. There was no kindness around the situation, that there was no kindness around the impact that this drug was having on the African community, Latino community, and we were targeted. They created SWAT teams to come into our community. They were, they were treating us like we were in the so-called third world country, where they were kicking our doors, murder us some more. Highly police our communities. So, and on top of this devastating, drug that came in that was flooded in by the U.S. government. The U.S. government then was in our communities in the form of the police and other agencies to trap us and shuffle us off into prisons and in coffins too. So the impact of this war on drugs was deep and profound, and I don't think that we have not recovered from it, because many people who went to prison during that era are still in jail to this day. And the impact of how African people are seen as drug users, whether it be something as high up there as, I don't know what's the worst drug you can take or have or possess now. There's so many that develop over each year, but as high as something that's really high, but to as low as marijuana. So that the impact on that is still deep and profound, and the African people are still suffering from this so-called war on, not so-called, it was an actual war on drugs. So so when Reagan was out here talking about we're going to do a war on drugs, they targeted African communities and all of these ways. In the same time, they're in Nicaragua, they're creating drugs. They're selling the drugs through the United States government to fund their war against people. They're shifting it, and they're funding a war in Iran as well against the Shah of Iran. And during this time, I think it was like late 80s. I was young and I didn't know what this was on TV, but all I remember is, and it's still burnt in my mind because it's all that was on TV, was this trial with Oliver North that that was talking about the Iran Contra affair, like the, and I always make a, a, a an an anecdote saying that the imperialists will call something that is devastating, killed millions of people, thousands of people have been impacted by their affair, and they will call it an affair or a conflict when it's something that is more than that has really had a sweeping effect on people's lives. They minimize it and call it unfair when they've involved two countries, three countries, many African communities in those countries. The billions of dollars were being shuffled around the world. Drugs and guns were being produced. This was a hot time for the United States and their allies in terms of the drug production and the creation of more weapons to kind of fund this war on drugs that was not only happening in the African community here in the United States, it was happening in different places around the world. And I also, I don't know too much about this, but one of the things that we also have to recognize too is that this is the same sort of story that we heard about when people were in Afghanistan. It's like, why are we in Afghanistan? Like, there's nothing that's happening. First of all, we were in Iraq, and then all of a sudden we found weapons of mass destruction in Afghanistan. We created Osama bin Laden, who nobody had heard of prior to the invasion of Afghanistan. And then we had soldiers who were coming back and like, yeah, it's like huge poppy fields that the United States have control over. And, they're importing poppies back into the United States, and they're producing, the drug that comes out of poppies. I'm not sure what that is because I am not that knowledgeable about all that stuff. But they're producing, the drug that come out of the poppies, and they're also using that to sell around the world. And that same thing that we saw at the beginning, that I've talked about in the beginning part when it came to China, is that you control these drug fields, you actually create and grow. The imperialist does create and grow these fields of plants to be transformed into drugs that they then say that they're creating a war to destroy because it's an issue that even though they're the drug dealers. I think one of the things that the party says that the White House is the rock house, and the White House is the rock house because that's the biggest drug dealer on the face of the planet. United States White House is the rock house. And when we when we look at this war on drugs and we talk about now what we have to fight against in terms of like mass incarceration, when I was looking at some statistics, there was um, African people who were still being impacted by this. That they were still, despite the fact that there's a legalization of marijuana in many, like at least 24 states in the United States, in some form of the medicinal or recreational, that marijuana and drugs is still one of the highest things that people are getting incarcerated for. And it's actually equal to violent crimes. So, despite the fact that that states are legalizing it, and I don't know if legalizing it is not the same as decriminalizing it, in my view, because if you decriminalize marijuana, then the people who have went to jail for marijuana usage or sale of marijuana should also be out of jail. You have to you have to take off their charges and set them free, but that's not what's happening. And it's really important too to say that despite there are people who are not selling drugs and who are not selling drugs and who are not like hard users, but may use recreationally, and people think that, oh yeah, this is great, it's been decriminalized, or it's legal here, you can use it recreationally, and you may feel like you can take it and do whatever you want to do with it. But in the family regulation game, in the family policing game, and for mothers, people who birth, and you go into a hospital giving birth to a child, and you got anything in your system, including marijuana, the first thing that they will do in many places is call CPS on you. And despite the fact that it's legal in 24 states, despite the fact that a lot of people use it for medicinal purposes, recreational purposes, which they can do in many states, that the law, the colonial law, still criminalizes mothers and uses that against them in the taking of their children. So you should know that they cannot do that. They should not be able to do that. And if that's something that you experience as a person who has a child and goes into the hospital, that you should go to, I need to get the link, and I should have been more prepared to it, but there's a sister called the Cannabis Doula. It might be on her website, where she has like a booklet where she talks about your rights as a parent if you go into the hospital and you use cannabis in any amounts, and how you can advocate for yourself. But here we have a whole nother hole that you're being sucked into. So it's not that you're just out here on the street minding your business. It's that you are a mother or father, primarily a mother, a parent who is going in to have a child, and you're doing something that the state deems legal, but the claim on the law, especially when it comes to so-called protecting children from their parents, is that you cannot take marijuana. As a matter of fact, we were dealing with a case here in Washington, D.C., where the mother had to go jump through hoops to show that she had a medical reason for taking marijuana, and they were still holding it against her for not giving her children back. So when we think that, marijuana in this case is something that has been legalized and everybody should be able to use it, it's still being used to criminalize people, while these mothers may not be in jail, but they are experiencing another kind of jail when their children are now snatched from them. And this, on top of everything else, is being used as a way to keep their children away from them. So let me talk to you about that a little bit more, because when we talk about the family regulation system, more times than not, the children are taken not because, not for anything, for no reason at all, because somebody might have called, they might not have enough food in the house or whatever. And instead of the state saying, okay, we're going to give you money or stipend for food, they then take the children out your house. And that might have been the reason. But the reason that they keep the kids, they continue to they just keep piling on the stuff. Oh, you don't have an appropriate house, or you don't have enough food in your house, or we found marijuana in your system, or some other kind of drug, or this or that. And then these become the things that they use as the basis for keeping your child, even though those were not the things that they used to take your child. They knew none of that information, despite the fact that your child was never at risk. So here we are. So here we are in 2024, and people are now celebrating 420 as a I guess a national holiday, going out in the streets and smoking marijuana, and but there are tons of thousands of people, over 100,000 people who are in prison because of marijuana and other drugs that the state has deemed illegal. And there are people who are experiencing getting their children snatched and kidnapped by the state because of what the state says is an illegal substance, even though the state that they may live in have legalized it. So the impact of this war on drugs is still being felt throughout the African community, and in so many different ways, and and most of us have lost people because of it. And most of us, and it continues to devastate the African community on top of that, right? So like people are still don't have relationships with each other because of this drug, myself included, with some people. And then we also um, uh, have to visit people in prison. Um, and we also have people who still sell that stuff, you know what I mean? And so, the fundamental issue of why drugs dominates this economy, right? It is a drug economy. And the fundamental issue of why African people are continue to be hooked up by it is still that political one, due to the colonial mode of production. We are still living under colonialism, and anything that we do, I don't care if they make uh, marijuana legal straight. African people will still be the number one persons persecuted by any law. That's just period. That's just how it is, because we still live under colonialism, and the impact on the war of drugs means that we are still dealing with a colonial mode of production. Colonialism is still intact. Black people are still seen as a threat, and just like the ways in which imperialism has taken on this drug question and sold drugs to defeat their enemy, to undermine self-determination in many different instances, this is still something that's being done in our communities to undermine, African self-determination. And if we are, um, you know, uh, concerned about, getting drugs, selling drugs, using drugs, trying to protect that, then, really within a exploitative economy, then that's just what they want you, what they want you to be focused on, as opposed to the fact that we ain't free. And the ways that we have to get free requires us to actually take a real deep dive into why it is that they're legalizing certain things, and also looking at even still the restrictions that are being put on people who are supposed to be in this game, like the rest of them. So, Comrade Jay and Coco put me on. It was just like, even when they said it's legal in your state, or you can be a distributor, retail, you can grow it. They said the fines are so high, right? The restrictions and barriers are so deep that even then, if you're trying to get in the legal game of selling marijuana in particular, then you still can't do it, because all the reasons why all the reasons that exist for African communities is that's really has been a barrier to resources and being able to get the kinds of supplies and resources and money it is to start up your own business in this game. And of course, white people who are benefiting from it and in droves. So this $1 billion a year legal industry. I'm not even talking about what's happening illegally, like what's be happening clandestinely, but we don't even know about. But the legal part, billions of dollars a year are being exchanged in this industry, and African people are still being excluded from it, while there's still African people languishing in prison. So, when we when we explore like our relationship with the United States government and the war on drugs, I think that part of what we have to always keep in mind is that the United States government is not our friend, not even the states that are legalizing it because we call them to legalize it, right? Because even in that vein, they're still making money. They're still making they still make money, period, whether it was clandestinely or illegally or whether it's legally, because now they get to control, who gets what and how much money they're getting from it. So now you have a legal stream of income that's coming from an individual who wants to start a business in marijuana production, right? Now funneling it to the state. And so now they can actually say there's a great economy, while African people who in that state still are languishing in prisons, and they're not being getting out. They're not being taken out of prisons for that. I for sure know, point blank period, somebody who went to jail for selling marijuana and some other kind of stuff and still was languishing in jail and might still be in jail because of those charges from like a decade ago. And it's an African person, obviously. So there was a show that I would recommend y'all watch if you haven't, because I didn't read the book that the CIA agent wrote, but I did watch the program Snowfall that starred Idris Damson Idris, and it basically was like, you know, telling the story of Africans who were just, selling a little marijuana here and there on the streets of LA. And then this white guy pops up and was just like, yo, I got this stuff that could make you some money. And Danson was just like, sure, what it is. And then they was just like, yo, this is making people want this all over the place, and they learn how to cut it, all these. So it basically tells the story of like the development of the use of crack cocaine in the African community, and the sort of relationship that they was having while this white guy he was in Nicaragua, he was here, he was there, he was making moves. He created a whole economy all by himself. And I think one of the things that this show tries to show, which I think it does unsuccessfully, is like this white guy was working by himself. He might have had ties to the government, but like his operation was like this, was like this singular operation that if it was successful, that the agency would be like pat you on the back, but if it wasn't successful, then they'll like ignore him and no avail of knowledge sort of thing. But it was bringing in millions and millions of dollars, and it was helping to so-called win the war in Nicaragua because of the funding that it was getting from the streets of LA. And then of course it spread to different places around the country. And I think really what's also important is that for African communities too, this really helped to spread the spread of HIV/AIDS in the 80s, where there was heavy drug usage, needles that were being used to use crack cocaine, and people, it was zombie land, but also there was like death and destruction everywhere. And if you lived through this time, then I mean you know how many people that you lost, what your streets look like, just and it was, for the most part there wasn't like police anywhere. There was just drug dealers, violence, death, murder, and it was like living in a war zone. And this was our lives, until everything died down. And then move forward to the 1990s when the opioid 90s, early 2000s, when the opioid epidemic took over. And here we have like white people who are now dying and overdosing from opioids, right? So, and so now it's not a super predator. Now you're not a welfare queen and you're not making crack babies. Now you're a housewife, a hardworking dad that unwittingly got hooked on opioids, and now you're worthy of being saved. You don't go to prison. What you need is help, and and white people are now looking for Bobby on the street. And the difference is, and I don't mean, we know what the difference is here, right? Like, we know the difference between the way that they attack African people and use this as a way to try to wipe out so many different people who were fighting for their own self-determination. And the opioid epidemic was like, okay, this is messing with middle America. These are the same people that we need. These are the patriots that support this United States project. But they're dying in the streets. Little Bobby is no longer going to be the senator. And these white people that's supposed to basically give the face, the brand of the United States is white folks, right? If these white folks are now, getting strung out, overdosing, dying, becoming the new face of drug usage in the United States, then here we have a slew that we have to rebrand. And so, these white folks who are dying are now not being flooded, and there isn't a SWAT team going into Pleasantville, USA. There isn't a swaddle of people being rounded up in cop cars and put into prisons or jails. There are not long prison sentences. There is no three strikes rule. There is methadone clinics. There are rehab centers that are popping up around the country because people are trying to get their children off of drugs. And they didn't get to the point where there's a lot of violence that is happening, but there are people who were just strewn out all over the streets, and this question of colonialism is really deep and profound, and people often question, like, why is it that Black people get treated differently? And the answer is right before us. We keep asking the questions that we know the answers to, because we live in an exploitative economy, that the relationship that this parasitic entity has with African people has been the same since the beginning, since its foundation, since the project was started. The project, being the U.S. colony, was started, was this is an exploitative relationship, and Black people are not supposed to be here, are not supposed to benefit from what the U.S. project was, the American project was supposed to have been, and so the goal is always to keep the brand on brand, which is to make this the whitest country on the face of the planet, despite them always saying it's a melting pot. But every time you hear the word American dream, the American dream was the American dream for white people who are coming over here to produce for the colonizer, in order to make sure that they are producing and creating a brand, a vision of this country that will allow more white people to come over and enjoy the fruits of the exploitative colonial labor that they're forcing on the people who they don't want here, right? That keep under exploitative conditions, including African people. Some people are just like, Black people been here for hundreds of years, and they still haven't gotten it together, because there are things like the COINTELPRO assassinations and devastating military defeat of the African Revolution of the 60s. There are the flooding of African communities with crack cocaine. There are the new Jim Crow. There's a quote from Michelle Alexander from that book that she wrote, The New Jim Crow. Excuse me, y'all. I'm recovering from the flu, so I'm getting coffee, but I'm coughing a lot. So it says, nothing has contributed more to the systematic mass incarceration of people of color in the United States than the war on drugs. And I mean, Black people, not every Black person has been in the hood or has had somebody who was hooked on drugs or knows somebody, but I feel like you're not far removed from it, right? Like, and so our experience with it is really firsthand. And when we also think about like the international effect of the war on drugs, it's like African people in other places who may have been slaving in the poppy fields or whatever, knows that relationship to African people who then are now in our communities in the United States who are using it. And so this destruction is happening on all ends. And so like there are actual task force, millions of dollars that goes into the police. Like, this war on drugs also funded, brought more money into local police force than any other so-called war in the United States, right? So now we have these internal police forces who are having heavy military equipment, trucks, high-powered weapons, high-powered devices that are used to attack African communities, none of which were used during the opioid crisis, or none of that stuff. But it was created to fight the internal, or to fight the internal colony inside the United States, right? Like the internal U.S. colony, the domestic colony. All of these weapons of mass destructions, guns. Also, guns were flooded into our community because ain't no, as the chairman says, there's no gun factory in the hood. You know what I mean? So like people like all this, just like there's no gun factory on the continent of Africa. There's no, like, so guns. When we look at how our communities are undermined here, we can also see how our communities are undermined in places like the Caribbean and Haiti and Africa, where guns are flooding these places, high powered weapons, uniforms, all of these things that don't get made in those places are there. And so we had guns flood our communities here in the United States. And so that led to the murders of our children and our family members. And then so like the war on drugs was like a layered effect. Like, so it was the drug itself that was killing folks. It was the people who were actually dealing the drugs too that was killing each other. And then it was the United States government who was benefiting from it all. So now we have this militant internal colony that was once talking about Black power. We need to overturn, we need to have African self-determination, all the things that would have like set us free is now being totally destroyed, from the inside out because of a drug that people are using and also selling as a way to make some resources. And for the most part, it made a lot of folks some resources, but it also made them it opened up the vulnerability, right? Like now you became a target of the US government on so many different levels. So now you were being a target because you're a Black revolutionary and you wanted to free your folks. And then on top of now you're being targeted because you're not a Black revolutionary, but you are somebody who supposedly is selling an illegal substance that the United States government is flooding into your community. And so now you're being pushed into modern day concentration camps called the U.S. prison system, industrial complex. And we have whole communities that are missing, because men are the primary victims of mass incarceration, even though African women are growing in number in that count. But African men are now disappeared from the community from this war that's being waged against African people. And then of course they may have been disappeared from the community because of the internal war in the colony that was spurred on by the colonizer itself. So this war on drugs is very deep, right, y'all? So like, people out here talk tomorrow, which you'll probably see on the socials, 420, whoop, whoop, celebrate marijuana. There's going to be some green hash. You might see my Snoop Dogg or Wiz Khalifa with a little logo on there. It says legalize it or some other kind of thing. And then here we are right now in 2024 in the face of marijuana smoking and all of that stuff is people, so-called people of color, Snoop Dogg, Wiz Khalifa, um, even Cheech and Chong, supposed to be Mexicans, right? Like all of these colonized people are now the faces of the happy drug, right? Now they're the faces of what they call 420 and the coolness. And even Bob Marley obviously is the icon of marijuana. And but in the same vein that Bob Marley was the icon of marijuana when he was alive, Black people was being locked up, put in jail. Same for, Snoop and Wiz Khalifa, that, had they not been who they are, they would also probably be back and forth in the prison system, from their promotion of and use of, marijuana. So when people talk about 420 tomorrow, I think that it's really worth us really laying out like the historical complications of celebrating such a colonial holiday, so to speak. And I know it was developed by some subculture of people who wanted to legalize marijuana and smoke and all that kind of stuff. But, I think essentially for African people has been devastating. Our survival of it, I mean, our ability to survive this attack, right? That's ongoing in so many different ways. That this attack that continues to happen to African people is really mind-boggling, right? Like, and we also have to recognize that there are people, even with the marijuana, like I said earlier, that are still being impacted by this, particularly Black moms. That's why we talk about this now on for the African Women Must Lead segment, is because um, when we are dealing with this, and we're only in this section, right? Like we're only talking about like family regulation, family policing. We're dealing with that, but like in this little hog of the colonial projects where people's children are being taken, this drug thing is big, right? It's huge. It's huge. People's children who might have been in a safe, loving environment, but tested, or the child might have tested with some marijuana in their system, which is not harmful to the child, according to all of the reports, has relegated people to be unparented. Um, the state comes into the hospital. The state is the hospital, right? You are now forced to defend yourself as a parent. Your child is being taken, and you're forced to leave the hospital without your child, while your newborn baby is taken to a strange place with some strange people. And you have to then fight for months, if not a year or more, to get your children back, because this is one of the things that they tack on to it. So it's no small thing when we talk about that. And you know, as we go into that, I want everybody to go to blackmothersmarch.com on Mother's Day in Washington, D.C. Black moms are going to be marching on the White House, the seat of the U.S. colony, and talking about raising up the issue of them getting their children taken by the state, raising up all the issues that we're talking about here, and making sure that people know on Mother's Day that there are mothers who are still out here who don't have access to their children because the U.S. colony has taken their children away from them. And so we want you to go to blackmothersmarch.com. And even if you can't get to Washington, D.C., we want you to share the information about the protest, and to, if you can, send somebody down here to be in the streets to hold up this question, because a lot of these parents are dealing with the implications of having tested for marijuana. Even if that wasn't the reason why the children were taken, they're still dealing with some of the impact of that. And so go to blackmothersmarch.com and find out more about our fight back against the colonial family regulation system, and how drugs, right? How they use drugs to further deepen the colonial crisis for African people through the family regulation system, and how African mothers and fathers and families are fighting back, organizers are fighting back, because they recognize the colonial contradiction is that we live in under colonialism, right? Like, and there is nothing that we can do other than to fight back and fight against colonialism. And that's just the long and the short of it. Everything that I talked about this evening is really about arming us to let us know that the colonizer don't have new tricks up his sleeve. From the opium wars to the war on drugs, this is the same sort of strategy that they use to undermine their enemies for over 100 years, and they will continue to do so. The prisons, they're not going to let Africans out of prison. They're not going to not criminalize Africans for using things that they say are illegal because they make the law. They're going to continue to do the same kinds of things to us. Even when you have a whole movement of people talking about legalize it, they're still going to impact African people disproportionately and have us funneled into the various industrial complexes and continue to really uh just have this deep and profound impact against African people. That's why it's so important for us to really be anti-colonial. So on 420, like your message on 420, if you do partake of some of the recreational stuff, is also to have a colonial analysis. When you post your little 420 meme or whatever, say that, the White House is the rock house, Uncle Sam is the pusher man, and and 420 all day, right? But like the White House is the crack house, Uncle Sam is the pusher man. Let's get free. And essentially, that's what the message has to be until we get free, and make sure that when we do get free, that we don't experience an opium war ourselves. We got to push back against the colonizers because they're gonna want to undermine our liberation at every single step. So, with that said, I'm going to bring my comrade back up, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. So I'm going to bring my comrade Coco Lewis back up to the screen.
Uhuru, like all the points. I know we discussed a lot before coming on live, but it's all the thoughts. I just really appreciate this political education because it is very important that we understand the colonial impact. So we are on our way to the Q&A session. So prepare your questions. Remember, please share your name, your location, and then your question. Now, before we go into the Q&A, I want to go into some announcements here. If I can get it to come up, there we go. All right, and as I mentioned before we go into our Q&A, just some annual announcements here. So if tonight's program inspired you or motivated you, we call on you, African women worldwide, to join the African National Women's Organization. We are the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, revolutionary organization for Black women. We have members in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and all around the United States. We are leading on everyday issues concerning African women. We are not just on the internet. We are on the ground in our communities organizing for African liberation. Join the International Collective of African Women Building the Revolutionary Capacity of African Women. To learn more about membership and to join, visit amweluhuru.org/join. Sorry, it went from going to nowhere. There we go. So show your material solidarity with the work of the African National Women's Organization. We have big things planned. We are working on the international headquarters for African women, organizing the One African, One Nation flea market and farmers market in St. Louis, Missouri, to support African economic development and other events all over the country. We are, and was an organization of the African poor and working class, so we need your support to make these projects happen. If you can't become a member, consider becoming a sustaining donor. Don't wait until this program ends. Pull up your phone right now, scan the QR code on the screen with a donation level starting as low as $5 a month, or renew your support today. You can also make one-time donations to our Cash App, which is AWML or you can donate on our website at amweluhuru.org/donate. Okay, come on. Wear Your Politics with AMWO. AMWO shop features t-shirts, sweatshirts, travel bags, bugs, hoodies, and even socks. Profits from the merchandise sales support the campaigns of AMWO, including hashtag Arrest CPS, Uhuru Kijiji Community Collective, and the Word Council. Now, become a decolonizer and support AMWO Economic Development Project, Decolonize Hair and Body. Decolonize Hair and Body are natural personal care products that highlight ingredients and traditional care practices used by Indigenous people all around the world. In addition to featuring images and quotes of African revolutionaries, they are good. From our butters to our conditioners to our oils to our lotions, is right here on my desk. Decolonize has you covered head to toe. Make your next purchase of skincare products from us at decolonize.com, or if you're in the DC metro area, you can purchase from us in person. Find out more on decolonize.com. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. The trial date has been set, and the time is now to support the Uhuru 3 in our fight against the U.S. indictments. Defend African freedom struggle, defend the African liberation, defend the Uhuru movement, and to find out more how you can support Hands Off Uhuru and to drop the charges against the Uhuru 3, visit handsoffuhuru.org. Now, if you really enjoyed tonight's programming, I would like to invite you to help us produce these shows and our shows and programs for 2024 by volunteering with us. And was looking for producers, interpreters, and chat moderators for future broadcasts and other programming. Email us at info@anwaluhuru.org if you'd like to share your skills. Now, Harry Daughter's Book Club, this is my my heart here. Harriet's Daughter Book Club and Study Group is a monthly virtual discussion group that centers around around African liberation related literature. For the month of May, we will be finishing discussing The War Before, the true life story of becoming a Black Panther, while keeping the faith in prison and fighting for those left behind by Sifia Bakari. And we'll discuss our May book of the month, which is Women's Liberation and the African Freedom Struggle by Thomas Sankara. Next discussion will be May 26, 2024 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 p.m. noon Pacific Standard Time, and respective time in between. Visit anwaluhuru.org/events to stay up to date of all upcoming international, national, and regional and local events and programs. And as President Yejide just mentioned before, we have the Black mothers. So another Black child was kidnapped today. And as one of the organizers of the Black Mothers March on the White House, we are calling for Black community control of our children. The Black Mothers March on the White House is a coalition of Black-led organizations that have been involved in the struggle to rescue our children from the custody of the state. Join AMWO and other impactful Black-led organizations for a dynamic weekend of events exposing and standing against colonial family regulation in the form of the so-called Child Protective Services. The weekend of May 10th through the 12th, visit Black Mothers March to learn more and to register. Uhuru. So those are announcements. And let's check out the chat here. All right, is quite a few here. So if you want to highlight any, Jay, that you saw in particular. All right, and this is from Sayero, the comrade. Isn't that amazing how they weaponize our drug use and they use the term for white people as innocent victims as we're daily slain and incarcerated? Uhuru, I definitely unite. I have family that's been affected on both sides. Yeah, as if Africans are the criminals, when the truth is, as you so eloquently stated, Prez, we are exploited, and the colonizer is for sure the predictors made. Okay, I think that's kind of out of order, but it's a very twisted narrative of how African people are. We're not seen as the victims, but and only as the perpetrators or thugs. They love calling us thugs.
You know how white people are the reserve for everything in the United States. That's why USM is so important, because folks need to understand that you can't be used as a tool for the colonizer, and white people have to learn that you are being used as a tool of your bourgeois uh, colonizer reality. Like, they're a part of the oppressor nation, and we use white people as a weapon at all costs. Look at how Trump weaponizes the poor working middle class white folks to become these patriots, and really weaponize mobilize this group of white folks. And the colonizer does that, even though Trump does a good job of these rednecky white folks, but also the white middle class. And the white people have been doing that, and the oppressive nation has been doing that in this country for a long time. It may not have been as glaring as what we see with Trump, right? But they have been weaponizing sectors of the white population for since since they established this colony. And so they need, like I said, they need the brand of white people in order for it to maintain this idea that this is the place that you want to be, and this is the place where you can become like these white. You ain't gonna want to come here if the white people here were sickly and and strung out on drugs, right? Like that. The measure of a successful imperial project is how good the white folks is doing, right? And you ain't gonna want to come here if even the white folks out here strung out on the streets of opium. So they got to make sure that these white people are good, and that they are also able to help them, complete their colonial vision for the state. So that's why it's super important for the colonizer to make sure that the white people aren't in jail, that they get the help that they need. That's why clinics pop up. And the enemy has always been the darkies, the people of color, the people who are lurking just beyond the oppression to
Mm.
reach out and attack you and strangle you in your neck, because we are constantly fighting against that in all of its forms. And so the white people, not so much. That's their what do you call it? The reserve army force. And they need these white folks, and so they want to make sure that they're in good health and condition, and they're going to do everything they can to save them, and also to save face. The same thing is happens when these white people blow up buildings and shoot up schools. They're not terrorists. They will never call a white person a terrorist. But black people, other times they will call you a terrorist in a heartbeat. And they will humanize the faces of white folk. Even that little white boy who shot up the black people in that church got taken out to a burger afterwards, and all we heard about was his mental health, and so on and so forth. So in all instances, when we see the disproportionality with um, how the oppressor characterizes what happens to African people versus what happens to white people underneath um, their system itself, then we start to understand more and more that the colonial project is more than just an idea that people feel about Black folks, but that it's an actual policy of containment. It's a policy of exploitation and oppression, and that's not going to go away by osmosis. That there has to be some struggle, and there has to be freedom that's won on behalf of African people and other colonized people in order for that to go away.
You dang. Okay, we have a comment. Brilliant analysis and summation of the drug war, Comrade Yejide, putting it all in context. One aspect is that African people forced to live in those deliberately economically depleted communities. Uhuru Comrade Angelica, and also use drugs to cope. That's absolutely true. You know, I'll let President. I don't want to talk over.
You be always trying to put this little accent on Angelica's, girl. Like it's Angelica.
Angelique, I'm sorry. Like my, I come from
Angelica's
a,
that
I
name. You be
come
like
from a lot.
Angelica. I'm like just do
Look,
Angelica, Comrade Angelica. Thank you so much for your
Comrade
comment.
Angelica. I come from a, a lot, mixed Latino family. So, my cousin's name is Angelica.
Yeah. So, Comrade Angelica, I appreciate your comment, and yeah, I think it's really important to for other people to for everybody to understand, like drugs has a the way that it's being communicated now, even by the colonial state, as something that they're being progressive. And one thing that the chairman says too is like the colonialism shifts. It's not like this stale thing that remains the same all the time. If it was this rigid thing, then it would make it easier for us to identify and fight back against it. But it's shifting, and it's making itself more malleable, accepting certain things, not accepting other things. For example, it's this purveyor of goodwill into the world. Meanwhile, like it's oppressive to its own citizens. And we like even in the dichotomy between Israel and Sudan, where there's like, oh, we give all this aid to Sudan, but you're like really arming the Sudanese state and the rebels. And at the same time, you're saying we're trying to help them not create genocide. In the meantime, you're like shuffling money over to Israel, inflicting genocide on the people. So like, so this is the dichotomy that they always want us to see. And I think that it's really important for us to like always recognize that, like the United States, people are like, oh, they're doing so much good in the world. I don't know who says that. Any person who knows anything about anything or who lives in the world cannot honestly think that the United States is what do you call altruistic entity, and that it always is always operating for its own purposes in the world, to create, to dominate and have hegemony in the world. So it's always playing that position because there are other people, other nations in the world, other imperialist projects in the world that are also jostling for position and using um African and other kinds of people as pawns, their lands as pawns, the resources that they have in those areas as pawns, to allow themselves to get more power and more position. So when we talk about drugs, right, and how it impacts African community, that was also about getting positioning, because they had lost a lot. This military defeat of the Black Revolution lost the United States in the world. Like here we have, first of all, they were fighting this war as losing battle in Vietnam. And then we have these black and other folks, colonized folks who
Okay,
just like
colonize
yellow,
folks.
yellow power, black power,
Yes.
talking about freedom. So here they have the United States was this huge oppressor, right? And killing black folks in the street, and this is something that they're always challenged by, because people who are oppressed will always fight to get out of their oppression. And the United States has always been the ones that has pinned down um, our 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 desire to get free. You know what I'm saying? So like they're always challenged by that. And one ways that they have been useful and successful has been in this drug economy. The United States has always been, my point was when I first started talking, was that they will use, they will allow women into the military, for example, to say that, oh, here we are equal, we're about women's equality, but yet these women will go out into the world to bomb other women, you know what I'm saying? And then here we have them
They
saying,
use
oh,
them for intentional. We discussed this. They
yeah,
use
yes,
intentionally to connect with, women in the areas that they're trying
yes,
to infiltrate.
absolutely. But also to say that they're this basis for like equality in this country, when you just said equal opportunity colonial equality, where the oppressor nation, white women, and also women in general can just become a part of the U.S. colonial project to exploit and oppress other people from around the world. And so it's the same thing with drugs, so to speak. So when you see 24 states legalize it, and it wasn't like, oh, we're just going to bend to the whims of the masses and say because the masses wants to legalize it, we should legalize it. No, it's like dollars and cents associated with these decisions.
Taxes,
It's dollars and cents
heavily taxed.
associated. It's like, oh no, we could make billions of dollars if we legalize this. So it's not a heartfelt warmth. It's a monetary gain that allows for states who may not have had an influx of resources to do whatever they want to now have that influx of resources from people who actually want to be able to have this as their employment,
Yeah.
so
Or it can be like Ohio, where the people wanted it, but they say, wait, 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 wait. We got to figure it out how we want to make it happen. And it just never happens.
mhm. But even then, like the good question still always is like, what, like this is not like freedom, right? You know what I mean? I hate to be,
Right.
what's the word, Debbie Downer for some folks, and like it ain't freedom. Like yes, you can
Just
smoke,
being a realist, like
you
it,
can smoke some weed if you want to, but like this ain't freedom. I think one thing that the colonizer will, not one thing, many things that the colonizer will do is create this idea that it becomes this place of freedoms and things like that. And on the one hand, this is, and then on the other hand, they're indicting our chairman and who and Penny has and Jesse Neville on for
freedom of
freedom on
speech.
freedom of speech. On freedom of speech, it's like this is the dichotomy that we're talking about with the U.S. government. So, yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I see from Spirit Realm. Thanks for the insight, sister.
Of course, I
Yes.
appreciate you. All right. Well,
That's it.
I, I'm not one to hang on too long, and I just want to.
Well, we got a hooroo from Shakura Sentwali, a hooroo
Uhuru
from St.
Cameron,
Louis.
Uhuru Cameron, since Shakur, you're in St. Louis. I can't wait to see you when we are there in June. We're going to link up with you about what we want to be doing there for the June One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market. And so we hope we can count on you to help with some coordination on that.
Yeah. Yeah, just
Oh,
some uhurus from Revolutionary 2 and a hooroo from Well Intentioned Asphalt. I
yeah,
think
and I
it's
see
from
Angelica's drugs keep people from fighting. I think
correct.
the I saw that already because I know that Jay put that on the screen, but like um it's true too because like the example that I like when you are, well, drugs don't keep people from fighting per se. You might have drugs fighting you, right? You might have people in your community want to rob you, so it encourages
Course,
interesting violence, right? It encourages nearby, next to you criminality that is obviously colonial law criminalizes this criminality, right? And then they swoop in with their cameras in the corners of of course fighting for freedom. I get it, but I'm just saying too
hmm,
that they swoop into your community and set up these cameras on your corners, and then they create they say, oh, look at the DC government is trying to bring in the National Guard to help with the crime in DC. They've increased the DC budget for the police, so when and they need our communities, um to be in these constant crises, violence, drugs, all of these things, because it gives them motivation, and it gives them the basis to say, look, we need more drugs. Well, they do say clandestinely they need more drugs, right? More drugs. Outwardly, they say we need more cops. We need more guns in our community. We need guns from the police and all these things. So it creates that basis for how they fund these budgets. And community members is just like, yeah, we need to be kept safe from the people in our communities because everybody wants to be safe. But the whole big picture is that the thing that's keeping them unsafe is the fact that the state in and of itself is the thing that's destabilizing the community and causing all these things. You're closing down public schools, you're closing down centers in the community that children get to occupy. There's no Black men in particular are experiencing high levels of unemployment. Black women have also experiencing low levels of employment, right? And then have the responsibility of children and childcare, which is not their innate responsibility, but that's how the stuff goes. And we are dealing with these things over and over and over and over again in our community, and this creates the the cycle of exploitation and violence that helps fund all of the violence that is happening and keeps us fighting against one another, and helping the colonial police create the basis for arming themselves with high power weaponry. So these are things that we always have to keep in mind. And Angelica, I do understand it does keep us from fighting for our freedom because, first of all, we're involved in this internal conflict that we're constantly in because we just trying to get free in our communities, and we can't even think about like the bigger picture outside of that, right? And so and so some of people who take drugs may be trying to escape from this reality, some of the conditions just to feel good, because there's no other way for them to feel good, and some of these drugs allows you to feel good and forget some of the issues that you're experiencing. So but if we get free, like all the things that we take drugs to feel, we will experience, because now we have the resources and at our disposal to create the kind of life that we need to live. So it's super important for us to always keep a anti-colonial freedom perspective on Front Street, so that we can make that our new drug, so to speak. Like our drug of the effervescence of liberation is the thing that's keeping us motivated, to get there. All right. Well, comrades, I'm a pull the trigger and shut it down. So I just want to thank comrades for watching today on all the platforms, and I want to thank my comrade Coco Lewis for emceeing and helping fill some of these questions, and also just support. Like we're going to be calling. Please share information about the Black Mothers March, blackmothersmarch.com. Go to our Instagram and TikTok, and then also we support. Share information about the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace in St. Louis. And because it's a fundraiser for our headquarters, y'all. We we haven't quite put thing out there, but the headquarters is in motion. It's in motion, and we are working on it, and we are excited for what we are able to share about it. Summer project, other opportunities for people to come and support, putting a nail into the coffin of imperialism by helping to build out the walls of our Animal Liberation Center,
Okay.
and just supporting that way. So your dollars from the convention, the donations and things like that, we got it in our coffers, and it's being used right now to facilitate all the things that we say we were doing, especially around the convention and the marketplace. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's program, and also check us out on Sunday, where the IEC of the African National Women's Organization will be here to talk about another April date day. Come, this is the discussion, y'all. So I want y'all to come with your contradictions and what what colonial capitalism has destroyed our earth, while
All
African and
right.
other tribes people have been trying to keep this thing together. These colonizers have been destroying the very air that we breathe. So come on Sunday with your comments and discussion. We want to hear from you, and you'll meet the rest of the IEC. So thank you once again, comrades. Appreciate you, Coco. Appreciate you, Jay. And we're going to close down the stream. Thank you so much, y'all. See you
Uhuru.
Sunday. Uhuru.
Vanguard up.
Vanguard up.